Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to learn all about Lise Meitner, a truly groundbreaking physicist who played a key role in discovering nuclear fission. Talk about changing the world, right?
Yeah, it's incredible. Her whole story, I mean.
hmm
Especially when you consider the time period. Imagine being a woman in early 1900s and just completely devoted to physics when, well, academia was pretty much a boys' club back then. And that's exactly the world Lise Meitner had to deal with.
Well, let's jump into that world then. We've got a great biography of Lise Meitner for this deep dive, along with fantastic essay by Yurgo Schneepat. It's amazing. He really gets into her work, especially her contributions to modern quantum technology, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Oh, definitely. It really is amazing to see how research done almost a century ago can have such a huge impact on the cutting edge tech we're just starting to develop now. And Lise Meitner's story really shows that perfectly.
Okay, so Lise Meitner. She was born in Vienna in 1878. What were the barriers like for women in science at that time?
Well, higher education for women was still pretty unusual back then. But Lise, she was just so passionate about physics. Like, to give you an idea how hard it was, she had to take the Matura exam, that's like a big high school exit exam externally, just to be allowed into university. But she did it. And then she went on to become only the second woman ever to earn a PhD in physics from the University of Vienna.
Wow. Seriously, I can't imagine having to go through all of that just to even start learning. It makes all her accomplishments even more impressive.
Oh, absolutely. And that constant determination is a key thing that Yurgo Schneepat talks about in his essay. He actually mentions that even Max Planck, the guy who did all the groundbreaking work on quantum theory, even he wasn't so sure about women in science at first. But, Lisa's brilliance, it's just won him over.
It's really inspiring to see how she just never gave up despite all the challenges. And then, later on, she moves to Berlin and starts working with Otto Hahn at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. And that's where things really start to take off, right?
Right. So at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, Lise and Otto Hahn, who was a chemist, they were this incredible duo. They were at the absolute forefront of research into radioactivity and nuclear physics. And it was because of their work together that they discovered isotopes, which was a huge step forward in understanding atomic structure.
Okay, wait. Remind me, what are isotopes again?
Isotopes. Basically, they're atoms of the same element, but with a different number of neutrons.
Right.
So they have the same atomic number, but different atomic masses. And their discovery was really important because up until then, people thought atoms were like these basic indivisible things. But isotopes showed that there was way more complexity inside the atom than anyone had realized.
So they're in the lab exploring this whole new world inside the atom. What did a nuclear physics lab even look like back in the 1930s?
Oh, it's interesting to imagine, right? Think like glass tubes, tons of wires everywhere. There's huge, complicated machines that wouldn't look out of place in a steampunk movie. And they're working with radioactive material, but of course, the safety precautions back then were nowhere near what we have today. They were true pioneers, really.
That's incredible. And it's during this time that they're doing those famous experiments where they bombard uranium with neutrons,
Yeah.
right? So what happened when they did that?
Well, the results were really confusing at first. They started finding lighter elements like barium in their samples, and it just didn't make sense based on what they knew about atomic structure at the time. You can imagine them trying to figure out what was going on.
And then, while they're trying to solve this scientific puzzle, the world outside the lab is changing dramatically. With the rise of Nazi Germany, Lise, being Jewish, has to flee to Sweden.
Yeah, it's a scary reminder of what was happening in the world and the persecution that so many people faced. Lisa had to leave everything behind, her life in Germany, her lab, her research, everything. But even so, she couldn't stop thinking about those uranium experiments.
So she's in exile, separated from her research partner. And yet it's Lise who ultimately makes the breakthrough.
It is. It just goes to show you how brilliant and dedicated she was. While she's in Sweden, she starts working with her nephew, Otto Frisch. And together, they finally figure it out. They realize that the uranium atom is actually splitting, going through what we now call nuclear fission.
Wait, she figures out nuclear fission from another country without even having access to her lab or the same equipment. That's just amazing.
And that's the power of theoretical physics. Lise, she had this deep understanding of quantum theory, and she used that to unlock the secrets of the nucleus. She and Frisch, they even used Einstein's famous EMC equation to figure out just how much energy is released during fission, and it was mind-blowing.
That is incredible. It's
Hmm.
hard to even comprehend what a huge realization that was, not just for physics, but for the whole future of humankind.
Yeah.
It really changed how we understand the universe and
Yeah.
opened up possibilities that nobody could have imagined before.
Exactly. And that moment, it really captures everything Yurgo Schneepat talks about in his essay. It's Lise Meitner's passion for scientific discovery, the chaos of what was happening in the world, and her incredible intelligence that just shone even brighter in the face of all that adversity.
It's a truly inspiring story.
Mm.
But then there's that shadow hanging over this triumph, the whole controversy with the Nobel Prize.
It's a tough one for sure. So 1944 rolls around, and Otto Hahn wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry for discovering fission. But Lise,
Yeah.
not included.
I mean, seriously, how could they leave Lise Meitner out? I thought she was the one who actually explained what their experiments meant.
Well, there are a lot of theories about why, and it was probably a few things all happening at once. Some people think it was just plain old sexism in the scientific community. Sadly, it wasn't uncommon back then for women in science to get ignored or have their work downplayed, even when they were brilliant.
It's so frustrating to think that someone so smart could be pushed aside just because of prejudice. What else could have been a factor?
Well, being in exile definitely didn't help. When Lise had to leave Germany, she lost all her connections, her network of researchers and those important scientific institutions. That probably made it harder for people to really see and appreciate her work.
And there's also the whole thing about her views on nuclear weapons, right? Didn't Schneepat mention that in his essay?
Yeah, that's actually a really important part of Lisa's story, and it says a lot about her as a person.
Yeah.
She absolutely refused to work on the Manhattan Project, which was America's effort to build the atomic bomb. Even though she knew how powerful nuclear fission was, she was really worried about using it to make weapons.
Wow. That must have been a tough choice, especially considering everything she'd been through. You have to admire her principles, how she stuck to her beliefs, even when it was hard.
Yeah.
Do you think that could have hurt her chances of winning the Nobel Prize?
It's definitely possible. I mean, refusing to work on weapons might have made some people in the scientific community, maybe even those deciding the Nobel Prize, kind of turn against her. It's
Yeah.
almost ironic, right? That her strong sense of ethics might have actually contributed to her being overlooked for this huge award.
It really makes you think.
Mm.
But her legacy, it's so much bigger than just the Nobel Prize, right? Her work has had a huge impact on all kinds of modern quantum technology, which is something Schneepat really highlights in his essay.
Totally. Lise Meitner's work goes way beyond just splitting the atom. She was a key figure in figuring out how the subatomic world actually works. Like her research on beta radiation, it wasn't just about doing experiments, she was diving deep into the whole theoretical framework of quantum mechanics.
So we've got nuclear power, which is directly from her work. But what about the link to quantum technology that Schneepat talks about?
Yeah.
How does research from way back then connect to the cutting edge stuff today?
Oh, that's where it gets really exciting. The
Mhm.
work she did in those early labs with, relatively basic equipment, it's paving the way for incredible new technologies. Like quantum computers, they're still being developed, but they have the potential to change everything from medicine to material science. And it's all based on the principles of quantum mechanics that Lise Meitner helped to establish.
It's mind-blowing. Lise Meitner's work from almost 100 years ago with the tools they had back then is shaping the future. That's incredible.
It really shows how important fundamental research is, right? And it's not just quantum computers either. Her work is also playing a role in quantum cryptography, which is all about using quantum mechanics to create super secure communication systems. That has huge implications for things like keeping sensitive data safe, protecting financial transactions, and national security.
I'm starting to see how her legacy goes way beyond any single discovery. Her work has created entire fields of research that are changing the world as we know it. But I'm also curious about Lise Meitner, the person, not just the scientist. Everything I've read makes me think she wasn't just brilliant, but also an amazing human being.
You're absolutely right. Lise Meitner's story is about more than just scientific achievement. It's also about resilience, integrity, and staying true to your values. Just think about what she went through. Being a woman in a male-dominated field, having to flee her home country, and then having her contributions minimized, even after this groundbreaking discovery.
And yet, through it all, she never gave up on science. and she never compromised her ethics.
Exactly. And that's something Schneeppat really emphasizes in his essay. It's easy to focus on the big scientific achievements, but it's important to remember the person behind them, too. Lise Meitner, she was a role model, not just because of her scientific brilliance, but also because of her strong character.
So Lise Meitner, she wasn't just a pioneer in nuclear physics. She was a trailblazer for women in STEM and a true champion for ethical science. Her story feels incredibly relevant today, especially as we face new challenges and try to understand the implications of these emerging technologies.
Totally agree. Her life and work offer valuable lessons for everyone, not just scientists. She showed us the power of collaboration, the importance of perseverance, and the responsibility that comes with making big scientific breakthroughs.
It really seems like Lise Meitner's story is one that everyone should know. But before we go any further, I think we should take a moment to appreciate just how much Lise Meitner achieved in her life. It's truly remarkable. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? I mean, learning about Lise Meitner, a woman who not only, became a leading figure in physics, but also had to deal with a world on the verge of war. And she did it all with such strong moral convictions.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how her story brings together these huge scientific discoveries with these really difficult ethical questions. It gives us a glimpse into like a really important moment in history.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are the main things you hope our listeners take away from Lise Meitner's story? What are those lasting impressions, you think?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that scientific progress, it's rarely a solo effort. It takes collaboration. I mean,
Right.
look at Lise Meitner and Otto Hahn. Even though there was all that controversy with the Nobel Prize, their work together shows just how important collaboration is and how hard it can be to say who gets the credit for a scientific discovery.
It's a good reminder that, the pursuit of knowledge is a team effort. It builds on all the work that came before.
Okay.
And Lise Meitner, she laid some pretty important groundwork, especially when you think about what she did for our understanding of the atom.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about splitting the atom either. Like Yorgo Schneeppat talks about in his essay, her work on beta radiation went deep into the core of quantum mechanics, and those insights are still relevant today.
Wow. And to think she accomplished all of this while facing so many challenges, you know, being a woman in a field dominated by men, dealing with persecution, having to flee her home country. It's amazing that she never let those things stop her from pursuing science.
Yeah, her resilience and dedication are just incredible. Lise Meitner's story really shows us that the search for knowledge can thrive even in the toughest situations.
And of course, we can't forget about her decision to not be involved in developing the atomic bomb. It really says a lot about her character and her commitment to doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
You're right. It highlights something really important about Lise Meitner's legacy. It's about responsibility. When you make a big scientific discovery, you have a responsibility to think about how it might be used. And she understood the incredible power of her work and what could happen if it was used for the wrong reasons.
It's a lesson that feels even more important now, with all these new frontiers in science and technology opening up. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing. I mean, the more powerful these technologies become, the more important it is to think about the consequences.
Absolutely. Lise Meitner's story reminds us that we need to ask ourselves tough questions about what we're creating and to use our knowledge for good, to make the world a better place.
Well said. Her story is a powerful reminder of that, and I hope it inspires our listeners to think about these things too. But before we wrap up completely, I think it's important to take a moment and really appreciate how much Lise Meitner achieved in her life. I mean, it's truly extraordinary.
It really is. She broke barriers, she made groundbreaking discoveries, and she stood by her principles, even when it was difficult. Lise Meitner's life and work are an inspiration to us all.
That's a great way to put it. Well, as we close out this deep dive into the life and work of Lise Meitner, we hope you've gained a new appreciation for the power of scientific exploration and maybe even a renewed sense of wonder about the world around us.
And who knows, maybe Lise Meitner's story will inspire some of you to make your own mark on the world, to push the boundaries of knowledge and make a positive difference.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time.